When her hand pressed lightly against my chest and she whispered, "Breathe deeper," "No, not like that," I realized this wasn't just a yoga lesson, it was the beginning of something I never expected. The first time I walked into that yoga studio, I wasn't expecting much. Honestly, I had signed up because I needed some calm in my life, a little balance to cut through the noise in my head. The space itself felt different than anywhere I'd been: warm wooden floors, sunlight spilling in through tall windows, and the faint scent of lavender mixed with something earthy, like sandalwood. And then I noticed her. She stood at the front of the room, barefoot, her posture graceful without even trying. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands falling around her face, softening her presence in a way that drew me in. She was older than me, I could tell instantly, not just from the lines of experience near her eyes, but from the calm authority she carried. When she looked at the class, it wasn't a glance, it was a steady, unhurried gaze, like she could see more than just the surface. I unrolled my mat clumsily, feeling out of place among people who already seemed to know what they were doing. She began the class with a voice that was low and steady, almost melodic. "Breathe in, hold, exhale slowly." The room seemed to quiet all at once, as if everyone was under her spell. It wasn't long before she noticed me struggling. My chest rose too quickly, my breath shallow and uneven. She walked closer, her steps unhurried, deliberate, until she stood just beside me. "Breathe deeper," she said softly, and then, after a pause, her voice lowered, almost intimate, "No, not like that." I felt her presence before I even saw her hand move. She hovered just in front of me, her palm lifting as if to guide the space between my ribs. She didn't touch me, not yet, but somehow, I felt the warmth radiating from her skin. I followed her gaze, her eyes steady on me, calm but unyielding, as if she knew I could do better if I simply trusted her. I tried again, inhaling slower this time, letting my chest expand the way she had shown. She gave the faintest nod, the corner of her lips curving upward, approval that felt far more personal than it should have. For the rest of the class, I couldn't quite shake the awareness of her. The way her voice carried across the room, the way she moved with such quiet assurance. Every time she walked past my mat, I felt a small surge of nervous anticipation, wondering if she would stop again. By the time the session ended, I knew one thing for certain: this wasn't just about learning yoga anymore. Something about her had already unsettled the rhythm of my breathing in a way I couldn't ignore. By the second class, I thought I'd be more prepared. I told myself I'd focus on the movements, on my posture, on not looking like I didn't belong. But the moment she stepped into the room, everything shifted again. She carried herself with the same quiet authority as before, her voice calm as she guided us into position. The room was full, yet I found myself watching her more than I should have, tracing the way her hands moved gently over students' shoulders or arms, correcting with a touch that was firm but kind. And then she was near me. I felt her presence before I saw her. The faint whisper of her steps on the wooden floor, the soft trace of her shadow stretching across my mat. "Lift your chest," she said quietly, almost just for me. I tried, but my shoulders hunched stubbornly forward, like they were resisting her instruction. That's when her hand touched me. It wasn't forceful, just the lightest press of her palm between my shoulder blades, guiding me gently but surely. The pressure was subtle, yet it felt like my whole body responded, my back straightening, breath deepening without thought. The warmth of her touch lingered even after she lifted her hand, as though my skin remembered her. I swallowed, trying to steady myself, pretending it was nothing. But when she circled around me again, I caught the faintest pause in her movements, like she was taking a little longer here than with the others. She adjusted my arm, her fingertips brushing lightly against my forearm, sending a quiet ripple up to my chest. "Better," she murmured, her voice carrying a softness that almost felt personal. I wanted to ask her something, anything, but the moment vanished as quickly as it came. She moved to the next student, her tone professional, her face calm, yet I couldn't shake the idea that something unspoken had passed between us. The rest of the class blurred. Every time she walked by, my body seemed to anticipate her nearness, waiting for the possibility of her touch again. The air felt charged, though no one else seemed to notice. When the session ended, I stayed kneeling on my mat longer than I needed to, breathing slowly, trying to collect myself. Her touch had been nothing more than a teacher correcting her student. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just the posture she had straightened. Something inside me had shifted too, something I couldn't yet name. Class had ended, but I didn't feel ready to leave. People rolled up their mats, chatting quietly as they slipped out into the evening air. I lingered, moving slowly, as though waiting for some invisible cue. She stayed behind too, moving with her usual unhurried grace, folding mats into neat stacks along the wall. For a moment, it was just the two of us. I offered to help, my voice sounding more tentative than I intended. She glanced up, a small smile touching her lips. "That's kind of you," she said, handing me one of the mats. The simple act of working side by side, her fingers brushing mine as she passed the roll, felt strangely intimate in the quiet studio. What started as small talk, weather, the difficulty of a certain pose, shifted quickly into something deeper. Maybe it was the stillness of the room, or the way the fading sunlight streamed through half-drawn blinds, painting long golden stripes across the floor. Whatever it was, I found myself listening to her in a way I didn't listen to most people. She spoke with a kind of honesty that caught me off guard. About the years she had spent searching for balance, about mistakes she didn't regret because they had shaped her into who she was now. There was no drama in her words, no attempt to impress, just quiet truth. I watched her as she talked, the way she absent-mindedly brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the faint laugh lines that softened when she smiled. She carried both strength and weariness in her face, as though she had lived enough to know how fragile moments could be. When she looked at me, it wasn't casual. Her eyes held mine, steady and searching, as if trying to measure whether I was really present, or just another passing student. I wanted to prove to her that I wasn't just pretending to listen, I was absorbing every word. "I think," she said quietly, placing the last mat on the pile, "people forget that breathing isn't just physical. It's emotional too. Sometimes the hardest thing is letting yourself exhale what you've been carrying." Her words stayed with me long after we locked the studio door and stepped into the cool evening. I walked beside her for a block before we parted ways, the city sounds rising up around us. But the memory of her voice, soft and thoughtful in that empty room, lingered in my chest. And for the first time, I wondered if yoga wasn't what I'd really come here for. When she suggested a private session, I wasn't sure how to respond at first. Her tone was casual, professional, but something about the way her eyes lingered on mine made it feel like more than just an offer. I agreed before I could think too hard about it, and a few days later, I found myself standing once again in that quiet studio, only this time, it was just the two of us. The space felt different without the others. The air was still, almost heavy, the soft hum of traffic outside muted by the tall windows. She moved across the room with unhurried steps, setting down blocks and straps as though preparing not just a class, but an experience. "Let's start with your breathing," she said, her voice steady, though softer than usual. I sat on my mat, trying to follow her instructions. Inhale, hold, exhale. But as before, my rhythm was uneven. She noticed right away. She came closer, kneeling beside me, her presence filling the small space between us. "Here," she said, her hand lifting, hovering just above my side. Then, with a gentle press, her palm settled against my ribcage. "Breathe here, not just up in your chest." The touch was light, almost tentative, yet it seemed to anchor me completely. I inhaled, and for a moment, it felt as if we shared the same breath, her hand rising with mine. "That's it," she whispered. I didn't dare look at her, afraid she might see more in my eyes than I was ready to reveal. But I felt everything, the warmth of her palm, the closeness of her body, the steadiness of her breath just inches from my ear. As we moved into stretches, she guided me carefully. Her fingers adjusted my wrist, her other hand resting briefly at my hip to help me align. Each correction was subtle, professional on the surface, but charged beneath. Her touch lingered just long enough for me to feel it echo after she withdrew. At one point, she stood behind me, her hands lightly brushing along my shoulders as she encouraged me to relax into the pose. My muscles resisted at first, tense with awareness, until her voice lowered, "Trust it. Let go." And slowly, I did. When the session ended, I felt both calm and unsettled, calm from the practice, unsettled from the way every touch, every breath, had left an imprint deeper than I expected. It was supposed to be about posture and breath. But alone with her, it felt like something else was quietly unfolding, something I couldn't ignore much longer. After that private session, something shifted between us. It wasn't anything spoken out loud, but the air carried a weight it hadn't before. When I walked into the studio the next class, I could feel it instantly. She greeted everyone with her usual warmth, yet when her eyes met mine, there was the faintest pause. A momentary hesitation, as though she wasn't sure whether to smile or keep it neutral. That single flicker told me everything, she felt it too. Through the poses, she was careful. Too careful. She moved through the class with her calm authority, guiding, correcting, but when she reached me, her touch was different. Where once her hand would rest firmly between my shoulders, now it only hovered, almost as if touching me might betray something she wasn't ready to admit. At one point, she placed her fingertips lightly on my arm, adjusting my elbow. For a heartbeat, her hand stayed there, and then, just as quickly, she pulled it away. That absence felt louder than the touch itself. I tried to focus on my breathing, but the rhythm faltered. I couldn't ignore the tension pressing in from the space between us. When I glanced at her, I saw it in her eyes. She avoided my gaze just a little too quickly, turning to help someone else, her voice steady but softer than usual. It wasn't distance born of disinterest, it was restraint, carefully built and fiercely guarded. By the time the class ended, my chest was tight, not from the stretches, but from the silence. I stayed behind again, lingering as she packed away the blocks. I wanted to speak, to break through the careful barrier she'd drawn. But she kept her back to me, her movements brisk, her face composed in a way that made it hard to read her. Still, I caught something. A small falter in her hands as she rolled up a mat. The kind of slip that happens only when you're fighting yourself. I stepped closer, the words almost forming on my tongue, but then she turned suddenly, her eyes meeting mine for the briefest second. There was something unspoken there, an admission, a warning, a plea, all tangled in one look. And before I could move closer, she smiled faintly, the professional mask returning. "See you next time," she said softly. I nodded, though every part of me wanted to stay. Walking out into the evening air, I realized the hardest part wasn't her touch anymore. It was the restraint, the quiet space between what we both felt, and what we weren't yet ready to name. The silence between us couldn't last forever. I think we both knew it. Each class felt heavier, the unspoken tension growing, pressing at the edges of every word, every movement. By the time the next private session arrived, it was almost unbearable. The studio was quiet, just as before. The air smelled faintly of eucalyptus this time, sharp but calming. She moved through the motions, guiding me into stretches, adjusting my breath, but her voice wasn't as steady. I could hear it, the slight tremor hiding beneath her calm tone. When we finished, instead of packing up right away, she sat cross-legged on her mat. She didn't speak at first, and I could feel my heart pounding in the silence. Finally, I sat across from her, waiting, because it felt like the moment belonged to her. Her hands rested loosely on her knees, fingers curled slightly, like she was holding something back. "I shouldn't say this," she began, her voice low, almost breaking on the words. "Teaching has always been safe for me. It's where I can be steady, where I don't let the rest of the world get in." She exhaled slowly, shaking her head. "But with you, it feels different. And that scares me." I didn't move right away. I didn't want to rush the moment. I just let her words settle inside me, the honesty of them sparking something deep. Finally, I found my voice. "You don't have to be scared with me," I said softly. "I don't expect anything. Just, being here with you, it means more than I can explain." She looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time, the wall she carried seemed to crack. Her eyes softened, glistening in the dim light, as though she was weighing every risk, every consequence. Without thinking too much, I reached forward, brushing my hand against hers. For a moment, I expected her to pull away. But she didn't. Instead, her fingers slowly curled around mine, tentative at first, then firmer, like she was choosing it, choosing me. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The connection hummed quietly in the air, more powerful than words could carry. Sitting there, cross-legged on the mats, hands entwined, it felt like the world had narrowed to just that small space between us. For the first time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was honest. The next time we met, it no longer felt like teacher and student. Something had shifted, quietly but undeniably. The studio was empty again, sunlight pouring through the high windows in soft golden streaks. She moved with the same grace as always, but her energy was different, less guarded, less measured. When our eyes met, there was no hesitation this time, no flicker of restraint. Only a steady acknowledgement of what had already grown between us. We practiced as usual, moving through postures, sinking breath to motion. But the pauses between each pose seemed to stretch longer, filled with a closeness neither of us tried to hide anymore. At one point, when I wavered in balance, her hand came to steady my side. She didn't pull away quickly this time. Instead, her touch lingered, firm yet gentle, grounding me. When the session ended, neither of us reached for the mats or props. She lowered herself to sit, cross-legged, and I followed, settling across from her. For a long moment, we simply breathed together, the quiet hum of the city outside fading into nothing. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes searching mine, and whispered, "One more breath. Together." I nodded, my chest tightening, not from nerves, but from the depth of the moment. She lifted her hands, cupping them softly around mine, her skin warm, her grip tender yet certain. Slowly, she leaned closer until her forehead rested lightly against mine. We inhaled as one. Her breath was steady, calming, filling the small space between us. I felt the rise of her chest, the warmth of her closeness, the quiet steadiness of her heartbeat in the silence. When we exhaled, it was slow, almost like a sigh, as though releasing everything we had been holding back for so long. Neither of us spoke. Words would have broken what the silence carried. But in that shared breath, in the gentle press of her skin against mine, there was an unspoken promise. Not rushed, not reckless. Just real. She pulled back slightly, her eyes still on mine, and for the first time, her smile wasn't guarded. It was open, tender, filled with a softness that seemed to reach right through me. Whatever the world outside thought didn't matter. In that quiet studio, surrounded by sunlight and silence, we had chosen something. Something fragile, yes, but also steady. Something worth protecting. And as I walked out that day, her hand brushing against mine before letting go, I realized that what began as a lesson in breathing had become something far deeper, a lesson in letting myself truly feel. If this story touched you, don't forget to like and share it with someone who would enjoy a heartfelt slow burn romance. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss the next one.